Hello everybody, welcome. It's so far mostly gray and blustery day here, where I am, when I am. You know, I have a couple of sort of bookmarks today. I actually don't like the use of this filler word, sort of. It's a... what would I call it? It's stuttering, that's great. It's a form of stuttering, and I don't want to... You know, I've often found, I think this is really important. I've been close with a few people who either stutter or have stuttered. And I recently came to know a young woman who had suffered a significant series of brain injuries, primarily as a result of relational violence, being subjected to beatings by a man with whom she was involved. And I feel safe talking about this because there are millions of women around the world like this. But my experience with her was extremely peculiar. I'm just going to state my two bookmarks because I'll lose them if I don't. The locality of facts and what is Zen. So in talking with this young woman, she was prone to produce incomplete statements in language. And what I was very surprised, my rational mind was extremely surprised by my experience of her communication. My heart was not. So this was my experience. As she produced incomplete, stuttery statements, her vocal music spun up something in me, not like Mindsight, in that I could predict what she was trying to say, although I could, but something much weirder, Heartsight, in which I could receive and understand in a very deep and compelling way what was in her heart, as if her incomplete vocalizations and the constant interruptions and the specific forms and structure of them were communicating really deep, complex, emotional figures that my own heart could understand very effectively. And it wasn't merely that my heart understood them. Something much stranger was going on. And I have this experience often, particularly with people who are stuck in some kind of suffering that is historically structured for them, right? For example, like a script that keeps replaying in relationships either with authority or lovers or parents or children. I can see quickly, especially if I care, the more that I care for the person, the more profound this is. I can see a metaposition. Sorry, there's a lot of wind right now. Over the situation that for me is like an insight engine, except it's not an engine, it's like a star of insight. And so what happens is that, you know, I rarely give myself labels, but for the sake of, you know, making something somewhat clear, I'll do so here. So, always throughout my life, but much more dramatically in the post-Toymaker phases of my life, the phases after the contact with the non-human intelligence that I refer to with this pet name, I'm clairsentient with humans. It's almost as if, I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, I do. I can find a way to describe it. I don't know, but I can find. I can seek. So, it is as if the secret interiority of others, like a star shining light on my heart, which my intellect becomes then the servant of, so I can articulate back to them in appropriate situations of this type. It's like I'm being driven by their interiority to see. Not see as in visualize, see as in feel, and then formulate a map. It's not really a map though. It's very intimate, this experience. And so with this young woman, as she would stutter and produce incomplete statements, I would say back to her what I felt those communications were trying to say, but not say in words, say in emotions and relationships and unspoken understandings. Now, obviously, when this is going on for me, part of me disappears, right? I'm no longer just Darren, and I'm pretty sure this is what goes on with authentic psychics, telepaths, Mindsight folks, remote viewers, shamans, actual shamans, people who practice getting out of their own way in various ways, right? You reduce the investment in the local Darren, and you get a much different way of being in the world and in relation in return, right? So it's not like I sacrifice myself, right? I don't like go nail myself to some cross and then wait for the visions. It's more like my love and concern for the person I'm with. Removes egoic investments in Darren. And this results in insight. Right? Now, there's an entire branch of psychology that studies just not just incomplete statements, but the ways in which we pause, the ways in which we interrupt ourselves, incomplete statements, partial statements, vocal noises that don't become words, how someone starts to say two words together as one, but then pauses and actually gets one of the words out. It might sometimes be the word they didn't mean, and all of this kind of thing. And this is extremely important. The reason this is important is because the actual languages of our interiority are naturally incomplete. This is what's happening with identity when we're dreaming, right? The natural incompleteness of the dreaming mind's way of being in relation is very profound, and it resists explicit structure. In our modern world, we are trained to favor explicit structure. This is like a bird being trained to favor one of the toes on its foot to the degree that it doesn't have wings, even though it has wings. Except with us, because we're talking about our minds, you have like 7,000 kinds of wings that you can form that fly above explicit structure, and we are trained to snip these off. Many of them we are trained to snip off and just exclude based on what is called rational thinking or common sense, right? But it is neither rational nor commonsensical. It's simply an array of pervasive fictions that we are instructed with and which are re-impressed on us moment to moment as we interact with the fake the fake aspects of the representational layer in the network of human minds, locally and distributively. Yeah, so I want to give an analogy here. So most of what we think of as knowledge is knowledge of the kind that is very compelling because it's hyper-collapsed. And it's not actually knowledge at all. Real knowledge is intimacy. It's like what I was having with the young woman. Emotional and articulatory intimacy. So I was able to articulate for her in a way that she celebrated and freaked out about what she was attempting to communicate to me with her stuttery, incomplete statements. And in that case, I'll come back to the analogy in a moment, but in that case, it was the very incompleteness and the interruptive rhythms and vocal music and so forth that essentially forced me, it caused me to see, right? So I became like a receiver that was willing to be effectively, oh boy, I'm going to get into trouble here. So rather than use gender stereotypes, we could talk about yin and yang. So I was willing to be yin, right, or receptive to the yang of her heart. And by being subjected to that yang energy, that structuring energy, and by being released from my own structuring habits and proclivities, not completely, but somewhat, the spirit of insight arose in me. So she would transmit content into me, and then I would have this slightly dreamlike experience where my awareness became the servant of her heart's purpose. And then I would speak back to her from there about what she was sharing, very incompletely in language, and she would be astonished and giddy. Because she has no experience of this in her common life. Now, children can do this all the time. Many children are like this, right? We train it out of them. I saw an example of this yesterday, which I'll skip over, but I was involved in an example of this. So, this is not thinking, right? It's not thinking. Whatever it is I'm up to that produces these miracles, in a way, it's not thinking. What happens, though, is that thinking is involved. So instead of the hand of my thinking directing my body, the body of my soul and my heart is directing the fingertips of my thinking, you see? And this is really how we are not supposed to be. This is what we are meant for. We are born for this the way fish are born for water, birds are born for the sky, and so forth. Right? So the analogy that I wanted to give is that the aspect of our potentials for intelligence that has fully captured modern humans, well, fully is a little bit wrong. There's some space that's uncaptured always. But that has commonly captured us and leads to ideas of common sense and so forth. By the way, that common sense thing, it's not common. First of all, it refers to essentially not doing dumb things because you have a little bit of an overview of the situation so that you're not so focused on details that you lose the plot, right? So common sense is not common in that it's a topology, right? There's some commonsensical things. But really, common sense is local sense. And we hypothetically transfer this into a universal, which makes us stupid. Because common sense is local to the people involved in a situation. And it's not hypothetical when it's real. So I just like to put this little, marker here that the beings involved in an actual situation have information that beings hypothesizing about it. They have intimacy, right? The beings hypothesizing about a situation will never have, ever. Hypothetical thinking is useful, but it's as deadly to intelligence as it is useful to pragmatism. So the analogy I want to give about the stuff that we call thinking and also common sense is imagine that somebody walks into a bookstore or a library. And in this library, many of the books, if not most of them, have those slip covers, right, on which something is printed, usually the title of the book and the author and some pictures or something, right? And in this analogy, a person walking into the library sees some slip covers and they say to themselves, this is extremely true. Wow. Sorry, I'm at the water and it's very profound. The way the water teaches us about the nature of everything just by what it does, what it is. It's breathing. It's alive. It's more than merely alive. So somebody walks into a bookstore and they see, these books have slipcovers. And they determine, after some tests, perceptually and comparing, it's very strange. They determine that the covers of the books are made of paper. And then with some further examination, they determine that most of the bindings of the books are made of something like paper and that the interiority of the books is made of paper. And having derived this universalization over the library, they don't need to read any books, right? Because they know, with a capital K, what the truth of the books is. The truth of the books is that it's just a bunch of paper. And this is a wonderful analogy of the very pragmatic but also completely debilitating and blinding and crippling aspect of our thinking minds. I want to be very clear. Your mind is not for that, right? Your mind is not for single-valued derivations over a manifold of continua that are expressed in your experience in various ways. Reducing them to single-valued whats is the death of insight and intelligence. You're just crucifying that stuff. And then celebrating the results. And you see this all over the place in distributed human societies. It's basically what corporations and nations are. They are the enactment of this, primarily for the sake of money, which is also a result of doing this, right? It reduces all situations and relationships to a single valued object, which is universally authorized, and pervades over, thus extinguishing, intimacies and relationships and so forth. The origins of intelligence disappear on a world where money is a primary feature of it replaces relationships with transactions. Right? And advertising is a way of pretending there's still a relationship there when there isn't, or should be, or might be. Though advertising is a complex demon. It's very difficult to avoid doing what I'm talking about while talking about it. But I'll have a go at it anyway. So, that's not thinking. And, we see some phenomena, we hear about some situation, and many of us are inclined to think, oh, that's a this, right? That's an example of this. And then believing that we have understood the phenomena, we then ignore the rest of it and go on to eating Cheetos and playing video games and whatever the thing we're doing is. I'm going to leave out some of the more deleterious things we do for the moment. Now, I am also prone to this, and single-valued thinking is very useful in an extremely limited scope. Right? If I want to have a cup of tea, I will, go through a procedure that will probably result in me having a cup of tea if I'm pretty good with the steps. And once I've made tea, do I have tea? Yes. Right? It's a single-valued thing. Now, my capacity to participate in my experience fundamentally depends on it not being single-valued, right? And this is where Zen kind of comes in. So, you go back to the first bookmark, facts. So again, if the scope of our concern is limited enough, facts are the result of limiting the scope of one's concern, awareness, intention, purposive orientation. And this is all denied in the give us the facts culture. All of that is thrown away. Facts are just truth, single-valued. There's no such thing as a single-valued fact. There's no such thing as a single-valued anything, except in language or conception or cognition. And that particular exception is lethal to the possibilities of insight, intelligence, intimacy, life, origin, spirit, so forth. Intimacies involve relating with manifolds, right? Multidimensional. This is just a toy, the manifold thing. Multidimensional bubbles, bubbles of many bubbles, each bubble being a dimension, and then their intersections. And the aspect of our thinking mind wants to basically throw all those bubbles away, collapse them down to the intersections, throw most of the intersections away, maybe all of them away, until just one stick figure is left. The books are just made of paper. Just so much paper in there. I'm not going to read them books. I already know what they are. They're just paper. Right? Yeah. So this is how this aspect, quote, thinks. And it can't stand anything that it can't reduce to a single valued manipulable. It would destroy life. Like, given authority and energy, power, it would obliterate life without a second thought. The same way that I would like to do away with machines, it would love to do away with organisms. And that aspect has important, useful features, but it sucks as a god. It's just vampirically, torturously, horrifically lethal. And this is the kind of a god that we have here in the United States at the moment with the current president. Who is, in fact, as stupid as he is cocksure. These two things are equivalent. It's cocksureness, 1,000%. Stupidity, 1,000%. They're just two faces of the same damn coin. This aspect despises the existence of organisms and sees them as a threat to its dominance and sovereignty over the single valued evaluation of all phenomena, which in human anti-civilizations like we have today is referred to as money or power, or is collapsed into money or power and then transmitted among the elite, while the history and future of life on Earth and all of the humans suffer horribly and irredeemably. So facts are local. They have a local scope. And you can say, well, no, there's facts that are non-local. It's not untrue, but it's not very helpful, right? You can say, well, there's a whole universe out there that you know nothing about. That's a fact. Well, it's not entirely true, because I am an exemplar or an idealization locally of the universe. Now, it might be true that I don't have a collection of representational data about it, but I do actually have some representational data about it. However weird. So I have the representational data about it that I've received from the humans, right? Astronomers, physicists, philosophers, and so on. And then I also have some representational data that's homegrown. Right? I've had a variety of direct experiences of origin and things that science has zero grasp on. The facts. There's a fact. There's a cypress tree. I'm putting my hand on it right now. You can say that's a fact. Well, it's a fact for me, and it might be a fact that you've heard me say this, but the scope of those facts is very limited, right? It's not universal. It's not even the closer it is to me, the more factual it is. But the facticity isn't the interesting property, except for the part of them, mind that acts as a sentinel, an arbiter of facticity. Now, there is a language the humans are familiar with in which facticity has a vastly different kind of scope. And it's not a regular language, but I would classify it as a language. There are other ways to classify it. It's a heuristic instrument, or a library of heuristic instruments of the same type. And that's mathematics. Right? But even the pure facticity of a statement as simple as 1 + 1 = 2 defeated some of the most amazing minds that have ever attempted to prove it, incontrovertibly. And this is part of how we can be clued in that this whole system of facts is a charade. Again, it becomes more and more of a charade the more it becomes conceptual, the more it becomes linguistic, or the more that it becomes Aristotelianly logical. Right? The quote, law of the excluded middle. A tree is never not a tree. It's either a tree or not a tree. That's not true. That's true in language, right? Matching pointers to reference. Nominata to nominatum. So we confuse that truth with facticity, and that is the beginning of the end of insight and intelligence, and understanding and intimacy, participatory relationship. If our concerns are narrow enough, in other words, if we've thrown away enough of the manifold, enough of the bubbling bubbles, to produce standing, structured, explicit assertions, and we do not remain aware of the process of having done that. This is part of how much of science proceeds. And you can get a sort of mechanical grasp on features of the Newtonian layer of phenomena to produce predictable results in machines and so forth. Yes, all of this is true. Wow. Why am I concerned about this? Right? I'm concerned because these fictions cage the birds of our minds, and they cage the history and future of our world, and they torment it, they torture it, to produce what? Gravestones? Something like that. No one would do this for one moment were they aware of it. But what I'm really trying to say is that facticity is relative. And it is the result of the purposive eviction of most of what's going on. Anything that's not easily reproducible, because that's the goal of mechanism, right? Easy reproducibility. Consistent, simple, I turn the key or I push the button and the engine of the car starts up every time. Eventually not, right? So is the fact, what's the fact there? That the button press starts the engine? Well, that fact is temporally local. See the problem? It's local to a very specific temporal sphere that has a beginning and an end. There's a before of this engine and there's an after where the pushing of the button has no effect. If I just take the battery out of the button device, no effect. Is that a fact? Local to the situation, yes. Local to the purposes, yes. Universally, no. So facts don't have this trenchant universality that we're trained to expect. And the only language that has something that more or less resembles that is math. But even in math, math can't swallow math. It's like that song from the 40s that was widely censored. It's not going to eat itself. Which was, kind of a sexual reference. So I just want you to see this locality of facts. And in physics, this is turning out to be a serious problem because we have this thing called a Heisenberg cut. We have some no-go theorems and so forth. But what's slowly dawning on the physics community is that experiments in one lab don't collapse the superposition for other labs, for other observers. And, the communication of results from Alice to Bob has an effect, but it still doesn't collapse all superpositions, right? The sort of superpositional collapse, which is a very problematical feature that depends on Alice not being affected by her measurements, right? Alice is seen as, quote, an objective observer, as is Bob. In these theorems and thought experiments. But there are no objective observers. Any measurement changes the measurer. Right? If I get a text from you, it transforms my situation internally. Just attending the text collapses my awareness in a certain array of ways. Right? And then I think about responses or implications, I make predictions and so forth. I mean, this goes to my toy that organisms are, in a sense, can be perceived or conceived of as in a way, as proofreaders in the physical layer, right? The kind of knowledge that depends on facts has a natural scope in which it's pragmatic and useful, and when it escapes that scope, it's radioactive, right? It just kills everything, which is very obvious if you just look at what the humans are up to as a species on Earth. They are a topology, but the valleys are so powerful that the mountains don't matter. So now I'm going to take a little time and talk some about Zen. Yesterday I had a a wonderful mini adventure. I was going to the restroom, walking to the restroom in the Botanical Gardens, which is one of the better local restrooms if you want cleanliness and comfort. It's not great, but it's okay. So, I was listening to essentially a foundation podcast on foundations of physics and learning and wondering and, forming my own toy theories that explain the paradoxes and where the confusion is. It's very easy to see where the confusion is. It's surprising that more scientists don't see it. I think they've been captured by presuppositions that are not just wrong, they're as compellingly trap-like as they are wrong. So once you adopt them, you're pretty much out of luck. Until experiment completely violates them in some way. So I was walking through a group of children who were overseen by a couple of young adults, a man and a woman. And I wasn't really paying close attention to the children. I was aware of them. And I heard this voice say, "Where are you going?" Or more like, "Where are you going?" And I turned and saw a child next to me who seemed, ethnically partially Asian. And I said, do you mean me? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm going to the bathroom. And he said, where are you going after that? And I said, well, I'm going to go around this corner toward the pond. And I said, where are you going? And he said, we're going to the redwood forest. I said, oh. And I noticed that he was wearing a Minecraft t-shirt. And he was very much natural, just naturally being a human being. I'll get to that in a moment. And he said, how old are you? And I said, 62. And I said, how old are you? And he said, 7. I said, wow. And he said, now this isn't a perfect rendition. I remember some of the features, but not all of them. He said, what is your birthday? But he kind of mumbled the last part of the sound, right? Incomplete utterance. And I told him. And he said, no, the numbers. And so I told him the numbers. And he looked really shocked. Obviously, he was capable. It's clear this young person was uniquely minded and capable of doing math. Not necessarily explicit math, right? He didn't count the numbers between, or I'd already told him my age, yeah? That wasn't the important thing. He was trying to determine the interval between, and he successfully did so, obviously, between my birth year and this year, right? So he sort of, probably blurrily, subtracted my birth year from this year. And he said, oh, you're really old. And I laughed and said, yeah, I am. And he said, soon you will pass away. And I laughed again. And I said, yeah. And he was bemused. And, we were just having a nice interaction. And I had kind of visually checked in with the adults, and they were kind of visually checking in with me. Clearly they were observing the interaction. And then, I asked him about Minecraft, and he said, do you know how to play Minecraft? And I said, actually, I didn't tell the truth. I said, yes, but I haven't ever played Minecraft. I know a little bit about it. Right, there's the fact problem. Was what I said factual? Well, not entirely. But I said yes, but when I was a kid, we had these little plastic blocks that we played with called Legos. Do you know what those are? And he said, yeah. So we had this exchange, which was very profound in a number of ways that I think will become clear in a moment. And then the young woman who was watching over the situation, walked up to him and said, he and I had exchanged our names. And she, said his name. And she said, we don't, we don't ask people about their ages. And we don't ask them about when they will die. And he said, why not? And she said, we just don't do this. It's a rule. Now, I had a lot of feelings at that moment. I have been subject to similar structurings forged by authority in my own childhood, and I'm very resistant to them. And they're not true. Right? Literally, consider the language she used. We just don't do that. Now, in the child's mind, it's very obvious that we just did this. So we certainly do this. I've just done this. And obviously, if it's a rule, then nobody does it, ever. And so forth, right? All of these, what should we call them? Structured fictional imperatives. So I turned to her and I said, I'm totally okay with this, in a happy way. I'm okay with this. And she turned back to the young boy and said, he's okay with this, but we don't do this. Now, I don't know the backstory, and I suspect that the young boy is relatively precocious, and that this presents problems for people trying to structure his behavior. I mean, there's some backstory here, right? When I was young, precocious is another word for spectrumy. And these diagnostic criteria, where they're not extremely useful, right? There's a scope, again, for these criteria. And where they're not useful, they're devastating. And nobody seems to be ambiently aware of this problem. Well, not nobody, but very few people. Now, the reason that I present this story is that I found the exchange extremely instructive. I've been a Zen student for something like 40 years. There's a long story of how that came to be true, involving reading Musashi, a bookstore worker named Ishmael, who's now a Roshi and was a universalist pastor back then. Me reading Musashi, thinking about going to Japan to study Zen, becoming fascinated by Zen from reading Musashi, being a bit of a, studying martial arts, being a bit of an Asiaphile, studying calligraphy a bit, and going to the bookstore and talking with Ishmael and having him, it's like, what did you think of Musashi? And I said, it's amazing. By the way, this is the historical novel about Musashi. And I said, yeah, I've been thinking about selling all my books and maybe going to Japan and going to a Zendo. And he said, well, you could do that, or you could come back here in about 45 minutes when I get off work, and we'll go to my Zen teacher. And I was like, what? It's like, yeah. Like a real Zen teacher? It's like, yeah, a real Zen teacher. It's like, okay. And that's how I met John Tarrant Roshi, a Dharma heir of Robert Aitken Roshi. And John founded the California Diamond Sangha. Back then, that was a group of about 12 people who sat in his living room. And I've been a Zen student since then. I don't think of myself as a Buddhist. In fact, thinking of myself seems not very Zen-like. But the thing that happened to me yesterday was that the natural, spontaneous curiosity and intimacy of a child's mind met my structured mind, and we played together for a moment, and then, there's a trope I'm looking for. The hammer fell, right? The hammer of, we don't do this. Obviously, we've just been doing this. This is not done. Now, we all have an array of sentinels that watches over propriety, and we have conscience and all kinds of things that we have words for anyway. What's actually going on is much more sophisticated than that. So we have these sort of sentinels and arbiters that watch over what other people might think, or what we think other people are thinking or could think. And this is a lot of what produces interrupted speech, but it also produces interrupted being. Now, I want to be relatively candid. I've rarely been to a Zenkai or Sesshin. I think I've been to three, and they were brief. The longest one was 3 days, and that was many, many years ago, like 37 years ago or something. I've sat for a few thousand hours. I meditate regularly. Our tradition is Rinzai, so we use koans, but it's not strictly Rinzai. So sometimes we do just sitting, or what is it called? The word will come to me. So I have experience of Zen meditation, but I'm not an expert, and I'm not a Buddhist. I study the Zen way by sitting Zazen. And talking about Zen is very similar to talking about kissing. Go ahead, make some face noises about it. Though, it's a topology. I was listening to an interview between Muho and someone else. Muho seems to be perhaps a German man. And these are both people with long, deep Zen experience. And Muho had like 10 questions. And they were things like, what is a Zen teacher? What is enlightenment? All these questions are very silly because this what is a fundamental instrument of dissociative ignorance. What is this? You've already lost your Zen. Zen is gone when you make whats. Which is part of why we have this koan, what is the sound of one hand clapping. But I want to talk a little bit about Zen today. Zen is not a religion, and it's not a thing. In a sense, Zen and kissing are very similar because kissing is a thing you become, right? You become kissing. If you're kissing, truly, if you're all in. And Zen is like this. It's like being all in. And since you're all in, and you're aware that, you're going toward all inness. Okay? So you probably have thoughts and memories and hunger and physical pain, and sitting is mostly not fun. It's rather arduous, particularly if you're sitting for long periods of time. And one way of understanding Zen is to move from evaluation into presence. Right? So it's a kind of a subtractive thing from one perspective. Right? You pull into awareness the tendrils of investment that you are familiar with. And just deeper and deeper into presence. And this idea, in English, we have this word emptiness. And we're inclined to think of emptiness as there's nothing there. But there is no nothing. Emptiness and nothing are not the same thing in these traditions. It's basically one way to think about emptiness is origin or origin, right? Origin and cessation together at once. Cessation of what? Of splitting, right? You unsplit until, not until, you just keep unsplitting. And the unsplitting is infinitely deep. And so I want to share the Heart Sutra, which I intone prior to sitting daily. And it goes like this. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva practicing the Prajna Paramita clearly saw that all five skandhas are empty, transforming anguish and distress. Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness exactly form. Sensation, perception, conception, consciousness are also like this. Shariputra, all things are essentially empty, not born, not destroyed, not stained, not pure. Without loss, without gain. Therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no sensation, perception, conception, consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no color, sound, scent, taste, touch, thought, no seeing, and so on, to no thinking, no ignorance, and also no ending of ignorance, and so on, to no old age and death, and also no ending of old age and death. No anguish, cause of anguish, cessation, path, no wisdom, and no attainment, as there is nothing to attain. The Bodhisattva lives by Prajna Paramita, with no hindrance in the body or mind, no hindrance, and therefore no fear. Far beyond elusive thinking, right here is nirvana. All Buddhas of past, present, and future live by Prajna Paramita. Embodying Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Therefore know that Prajna Paramita is the great sacred mantra, the great vivid mantra, the unsurpassed mantra, the supreme mantra which completely removes all anguish. This is fact, not mere formality. Therefore set forth the Prajna Paramita mantra, set forth this mantra and proclaim. Om Gate Gate Parasam Gate Bodhi Svaha. Om Gate Parasam Gate Bodhi Svaha. Om Gate Parasam Gate Bodhi Svaha. Now this is the English version of the Prajna Paramita Heart Sutra. In it, Avalokiteshvara, a bodhisattva, is speaking to Shariputra, so that you know what these two names are. And you can see the essence of Zen practice encoded here. This isn't Darren knowledge. This I have heard, this I have been shown. And so what Zen isn't something you get. And I remember the strange look on my teacher's face when I came and requested to learn Zen with him. And traditionally, I don't recall the actual exchange, but there was a feature of it that was traditional, where the teacher basically tells you, go away. Right? This was much more severe in other times and places, in Japan, China, perhaps India. It's not a recruitment game. Right? And when someone shows up and they want to study Zen, most of the time they've got everything backwards. They think they're going to get something. And what they're going to get is enlightenment. This is not really a thing. There are experiences, we have words for them. Moksha in Hindu, the direct experience of the mind of God. Satori or Kensho in Zen. And also, what is it? Another word I'm at a loss for. It's because I get it confused with moksha. There's a word for the kinds of experiences that are deceptive, but often precede Satori or Kensho. Sometimes these are visionary experiences. Now, I've sat for a long time, and I've had very few non-ordinary experiences during Zen sitting. None of them resemble Kensho or Satori, which are not equivalent with enlightenment and are not accomplishments. Right? Remember in the Heart Sutra, no attainment, for there is nothing to attain. And this focus on emptiness, right? Emptiness of what? Emptiness of qualities, emptiness of thinking. This could be understood, though, not as emptiness, but as pure undifferentiated potential, or at least as mostly undifferentiated potential. This would be like placing your mind in origin, or origined, right? Origin plus the ending, together, without conflict. Annihilation is not a state. It's it's not a mode. In fact, there is nothing, it is. Similarly, there is nothing, it is not. So it is the end of discursive splitting and the annihilation of this discursive splitting. Me, them, self, other, origin, ending, heaven, earth, hell, right? All of these distinctions, gone. This is what you are coming from, I would say. You are arriving moment to moment from this and disappearing moment to moment into this. This is why Avalokiteshvara says all of these negative statements, right? No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no color, sound, scent, taste, touch, thought, no seeing, and so on to no thinking. Yeah? He's not telling you what enlightenment is. He's unsplitting the splits. Right? And so annihilation in this sense and emptiness in this sense, they are not dead inside things or states or modes. They are unmitigated intimacy with origin, being, arising, departing, front, back, inside, outside, self, other, up, down, hot, cold, black, white, morning, night, sun, moon, father, daughter, son, mother. Yeah? All these things disappear. This is resonantly transcendent. of all qualities and perspectives. Now, Zen, really, though, is not an achievement. You don't. Enlightenment is not an achievement. It's the opposite of achievements. This is why Avalokiteshvara says, no attainment, for there is nothing to attain. This isn't a joke, and it's not tricky language. Right? This is all splitting, collapsing into origin, and even the before of origin. Now, Zen, it's not an idea. It's not even really a practice. These are just words we use so that we can, give the grasping thing in our mind something to mess around with. But really, Zen is actually, there's sort of two ways to think about it that are, well, no, it's not true. There are two perspectives that, given my current orientation and purposes, are near to hand. And the first is spontaneous, free relation, awareness, intimacy, unsplitting, playful presence. Like the child in my story earlier. He showed me what this was like because I have forgotten. Right? I would very much like to be as brave as the child. Very much like to be as brave as the child. Who approached me. In every aspect of my life, I would like to be like this child. But I am inhibited and concerned with what others might think or not think, or if they will misunderstand me or judge me or so forth, or if my conscience will, crop up and say I'm a bad boy. Distinction, splitting. So in one sense, Zen is unfettered spontaneity. And it's not unfettered as a state, it's actively unfettering. In another sense, Zen is specifically the posture and practice of Zen meditation not theoretically, not as a concept, not as an idea. The same way kissing is, we have a word for it, or breathing air. Zen involves the awareness of breathing, the awareness of the body, and if appropriate, the focus in the mind on a koan. Explaining what a koan is, conceptually it's not very hard. What it actually is impossible. And the koans don't really make any sense to the rational mind, and the rational mind's access to their power is zero. None. Right. You read a book of koans, it will not help you. You probably won't even be puzzled. You'll just think this is nonsense, most likely. Your rational mind will certainly think that. I've worked with the koan for 40 years or so. Around there. It's a koan often given first. But it's not really important here. Zen is the doing of Zazen. That's what it is. It's also perhaps this other thing, this unfettered presence of awareness, unattached to splitting and the products of splitting. The incredible energy that arises when the mind retrieves its investments in identity, quality, characteristic, past, future, history. The power of this mind, this unfettered mind, it could literally say to the mountain, go to the moon, and the mountain would go there. It would not do this. But this is available. All of the things we think of as miraculous, they are not miraculous. They are the product of the boundless energy, the spirit of truth and beauty, which is no spirit at all. We, in our minds, are like cities. We have to keep the whole city filled with energy. Past, history, future, self, other, green, blue, hot, cold, black, white, day, night, good, bad, tasty, disgusting. And this is not, all bad. But these formations trap our origin spirit energy. And this is sort of what is meant by the very complex idea that I will not here delve into called karma. So, the child, he was being very zen, in my view. Spontaneous, playful, curious, alive. And then the adult, just like the thinking mind, came over and said, we don't do this. This is just not done. But he was like a spark or a star in my life and in my day. He transmitted to me directly, like an old Zen teacher, the spirit of Zen. Spontaneous, unfettered presence of being, non-being, origin, annihilation. In fact, he almost did like a classical teisho, right? A classical Zen teisho, or even a koan. Okay? Where are you going? This is often how a conversation with a Roshi begins when you first meet them. Except usually it will be, where have you come from? How old are you? These are not trick questions, but they have a quality of mischievous testing, right? Are you here now? Yeah? Are you here right now? Where are you? Who are you? Show me your credentials, right? Not in the sense of your degrees or your vocation. Show me what is essential about you. And often when in the koans, a monk or one who wants to study Zen will come and meet the teacher, and the teacher will investigate them in a way. The Zen way of investigating is very formless and slippery. Good luck if you try to figure it out. It's not using the principles that you're used to using in investigations. The Zen teacher can sort of tell how many buckets of water you're carrying simultaneously and which ones matter, which ones are really heavy. Yeah. And if you can slip out of the buckets and suddenly appear and disappear fluidly, then this may influence the emptiness. So Zen is really, it's something you get rid of, right? It's like a boat that you throw away when you get to where the sun is from. It's unsplitting from one perspective. These are some things, they are all wrong. Right? All the things I have said, this is like heaping garbage on garbage or putting poo on my face and then going up on stage. And you'll hear this kind of talk in Zen books as well. But it's something. Yeah? I have said something that so that those who follow me will know something of one of the aspects of my path as a being in this world, in this incarnation. Actually, there are no incarnations. This is why, if you listen to the words of the Heart Sutra, and by the way, that's normally intoned with like a frog drum, right? So you're going to like, pak, 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 shari, putra, all things are. There's the frog drum, which has a name, I can't recall it. Most of us spend our lives in a skeletal form. And the skeletal form is all of these, they're not just attachments, though this is the word that's commonly used. We are splitting into feature sets We are splitting into fictions that we habitually sustain and identify with. And so Zen is sort of the slow or sudden retraction of all such investments. Enlightenment is not a thing. It's not a what. There's no what is enlightenment. What I heard yesterday was something I had not heard before that I found interesting. Which is that someone said, there are no enlightened beings, there is only enlightened behavior. This is also not true. Both things are not true. It is not true that there are enlightened beings, and it is not true that there are no enlightened beings. They are provisional. These are things one can say. Right? All that provisionality, wipe it away, and the essential matter will become clear as you. I'm not encouraging anyone to study Zen. I'm not singing my praises for being a Zen student. I am stupid and a human and trapped up in all kinds of mess. But I do practice sitting. It's very important in my life. Yeah, I can't find the Japanese words that I'm looking for. It's okay. So, beautiful spirits, grateful for this time together today. Hope you have found some inspiration and beauty and medicine in our walks together. And I honor the spirit of the beings who seek the liberation of all beings and the reconciliation of beauty and origin in our lives and experiences and situations. I honor all these beings. May your path be beautiful and liberating, healing and loving, playful and spirited. May your problems slide off of you like rain, evaporating away. May we learn to become, to fulfill the promise of our human incarnations with and for each other and the sake of all beings. Thank you for joining me. If you feel so inclined, take a moment to like or comment or ask a question or render a severe criticism or share my recording or support my work if you wish to. Grateful for those of you who do, and all of you who listen. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning and unforgetting together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.